Hi, welcome to Generative AI course. In this class, we'll go through the high level, the course agenda of this whole training. Before going to the course agenda, let me introduce myself. My name is Venu Babu. I've been working in IT industry for last 20 plus years. For last 8 plus years, I've been working in different cloud environments. It could be AWS, Azure, GCP, IBM Bluemix. So for last 3 plus years, I've been working in AI, generative AI, and agentic AI implementation, and also the training. I'm also certified AWS solution architect developer. I also did couple of Azure certifications also. With that, let me get started. Let me go through the course agenda. So the high level, this generative AI course contains 8 modules. Let me go through each and every module. So the module one, we'll see what is the introduction to generative AI. As part of this course, as part of this module, we'll see what is the difference between traditional AI and generative AI, what is AI, what is ML, what is deep learning, and also we'll go through some of the traditional AI, supervised learning, unsupervised learning. In supervised learning, also linear regression and classification, and also clustering for unsupervised learning. We'll also go through some of the use cases of AI or generative AI as part of this introduction class. Apart from that one, we'll also go through some of the setups required or maybe API keys required for this course. We'll go through the setups required for this course, and also we'll go through Volama setup. How can you invoke different LLMs from your local machine itself using Olama? That is what we'll be covering as part of module one. In the module two, which is foundational models or frontier models, as part of this module, we'll go through what is the difference between first of all, what are the foundational models or frontier models. They are trained with the billions of data for the general purpose use cases. Apart from that one, we'll go through what is the difference between regular LLMs and reasoning LLMs, why parameter matters. When you're talking about billions of parameters, what are those parameters? What are those billions of parameters? So we'll talk those things, and also we'll talk about transformer architecture. So the architecture behind all the generative AI or LLMs. So we'll go through the transformer architecture as part of this class. So each module, it will have theory part and also the practical part. As part of this module two, what we'll do is we'll how can you using Colab, how can you do the implement simple chat applications using Gemini or maybe Llama. As part of this module, we'll go through those exercises also. Next, coming to the prompt engineering. So the prompt engineering is the way of interacting with the prompt is the way of interacting with LLMs. So we'll also go through as part of this module what are the different type of prompts you can give for the different scenarios or different tasks. It could be summarization task, it could be question and answers, or it could be role playing. So it depends upon your use case, different task, how can you give the different prompting. That is what we'll cover as part of this class. And also we'll go through as you are sending the prompt, how can you send some examples. So you can say zero shot, one shot, few shot. So few shot means we'll be sending few examples along with that prompt. One shot means we'll be sending one example as part of that prompt. How can you send the examples along with the prompt? That is what we'll be covering as part of this module. And also, that's the theory part. The practical part, we'll go through different prompts for the different tasks. Zero shot prompt, how can you give the zero shot prompt, one shot prompt, few shot prompts, and also we'll go through the prompt templates. Next, coming to the module 4, the vector database. So as part of this class, we'll go through why do we need to use vector database. So let's say if you have any company proprietary data or knowledge base, how can you use your company knowledge base along with your LLMs or maybe generative AI. That's what we'll go through as part of this course. So let's say if you have any knowledge base, how can you insert that data into the vector database using the different embedding models? And what we'll do is generally we'll clean up all the data, we'll chunk the data, and we'll create the embeddings, and those embeddings will store into the vector database. After storing those data into vector database, how can you do the semantic search? So there is a difference between keyword search and semantic search. As part of this module, we'll go through what is semantic search, what is the difference between keyword search and semantic search, and also we'll go through what is the difference between vector databases and regular databases or graph databases. We'll go through the popular vector database available in the market. It could be Pinecone, Fias, ChromaDB, and also that is what we'll be covering as part of the theory part. In the practical session, we'll go through, we'll take some text document, big text document or PDF documents. How can you ingest that data into the Pinecone database? And after inserting the data into Pinecone or maybe vector database, or it could be Fias database and Chroma database, how can you do the semantic search when you send some prompt? That is what we'll be covering as part of this module. After that one, in module 5, we'll go through the frameworks. So there are two frameworks available, very famous frameworks for generative applications. There is a framework called LangChain and Llama Index. We'll go through those two frameworks for generative AI application development, and also we'll go through the VLLM for inferencing. How can you use VLLM for inferencing purpose? So that is what we'll be covering as part of the frameworks class. So that is the theory part, and coming to the practical part, we'll go through how can you use LangChain framework, Llama Index frameworks for generative applications, and also how can you use VLLM for inferencing. So downloading the model from model repositories like Hugging Face, and deploy. How can you deploy those models for the inferencing or testing purpose, maybe in your on-premise system or in cloud or in your environment, in your local environment. All those things we'll go through as part of this module. Next, coming to the fine tuning and quantization. So let's say, so before going to the fine tuning and quantization, so using the prompt engineering and vector database, so we are not going to change the LLM weights itself, internal weights, but we are going to change using vector databases or maybe prompt engineering the behavior of the how LLM behaves. That is what will be changing. But in the fine tuning and quantization, we'll change the model weights, the LLM weights itself using the fine tuning. So let's say you have any domain specific data or maybe any specific use case, how can you give the training to that LLM so that it will answer correctly for your use case or for your domain? That is what the fine tuning is about. And the quantization, so let's say if you have a big model and if you want to use that model in mobile devices or small devices, how can you quantize that model so that you can reduce the size of that model? There are different quantization techniques are there, so we'll go through all those techniques as part of this class. And also in the fine tuning, as part of the exercises or practical things, we'll see some examples. How can you fine tune using the LoRa? There is a technique called LoRa. How can you apply LoRa technique for fine tuning? Or maybe we'll also go through GCP, Google Cloud environment. How can you fine tune using the GCP for fine tuning? And also how can you quantize or reduce the size of those models? We'll practically see the difference, reducing the model size using the different quantizations. Quantizations, it could be including 8-bit quantization, 16-bit quantization. Generally, all the LLM, the weights will be represented in 32-bit. So using the quantization, you can reduce those 32-bit to 16-bit or maybe 8-bit, so that you can reduce the size of that LLM, so that you can use those LLMs, reduced LLMs, maybe in small devices like mobiles. Next, coming to module 7, as part of this module, we'll go through generative AI architectures. there are different architectures are available in generative AI. So it depends upon your use case. You can use one of those architecture. So first we'll go through the information retrieval. How can you use architecture for LLM implementation? And also the next one is RAG. This is very famous. A lot of companies use this one. If you have any company proprietary knowledge base or proprietary data, a lot of people use this RAG architecture for inserting into the vector database and doing the semantic search. So the RAG is retrieval augment generation. We'll go through the RAG architecture, and there are different architectures also: hybrid RAG, contextual RAG, RAG with re-ranking, graph RAG. So we'll go through all those different type of RAG implementations or different architecture, generative architectures as part of this module. So that's the theory part, and the practical hands-on part. We'll try to implement some different some of those architectures like contextual RAG. How can you implement hybrid RAG? How can you implement the RAG with re-ranking? How can you apply, or maybe a basic RAG itself? How can you implement that one? The hands-on. How can you do those? All those things as part of this module. We'll go through those things. Coming to the module 8. Module 8, what we'll do is we'll implement end-to-end generative applications. So what we'll do is, how can you expose the LLM code using different REST endpoints, using the fast API, Flask, using fast API, how can you expose the REST endpoints to the front end to the consume? And the front end side, you can use different frameworks like Streamlit or maybe Gradio. So we'll use one of those modules, Streamlit, and we can invoke those REST endpoints so that you can implement end-to-end generative application. So as part of this class, we'll also go through how can you send natural language questions. So if you want to interact with any generally SQL databases, you have to send some SQL queries. So instead of sending the SQL queries, you can send the queries in your natural language, and you can convert those natural language queries to SQL queries, and you can execute those queries and return the results to end user. That is what we'll be covering as part of this module. And also as part of this module, we'll also go through the introduction to agentic AI. What is the difference between generative AI and agent? What are the advantages you will get using the agent? How can you use agent by calling some different tools? What are the different architectures available for agentic AI implementation? So that is what we'll be covering as part of module 8. This is a high-level agenda of this course. Now, if you have any questions, you can contact us, contact at generative.com, or you can reach out our website, generative.com. With that, yeah, before getting into first module, let me cover some of the FAQs. So there are a lot of people are asking, is this mandatory? Generative AI is mandatory, or AI is mandatory? So if you hear AI is are mostly agent AI, generative AI, it is becoming mandatory in every organization. So some people are asking, is it for me? I can say generative AI is for everybody, irrespective of your role in any organization, irrespective of your organization. You could be developer, or you could be QA engineer, or you could be project manager, or maybe you are in the leadership role. This course, a lot of people are using the tools, maybe Claude or Codex for day-to-day the coding purpose, or maybe for generating the code. Or maybe it could be some other tools like Copilot or maybe Cursor. There are different coding tools or vibe coding tools are available in the market. So if you use the tools, at least you can learn how to use the tools. But with this course, the concepts behind the tools are different tools, whatever you have been using. It could be Codex, Claude, or maybe any tools you have been using. The behind concepts you can learn from this course. With that, let me get started with the module. Welcome back again. Thanks. Looking forward in getting started with module 1. Thank you.